Hi guys, it's Izzy, and you will obviously notice that we are in a change of location. That is because I won't bore you with long explanations, but I have a complicated neurological issue at the moment, which means every time I sit up I go mute and blind, so I can't sit up to film. So we are here in my bed because I can't sit up, and not making videos is boring. I also have really twitchy hands, so I won't be holding up any books, I'll just be putting them on the screen. And yeah, I figured I still want to film. This is the only way I can film, so enjoy me being in bed, I guess. I mean, we're really mixing it up for the location, for the thumbnail, and I don't look too hot, but you know, we're just working with what we've got. So that's what we're going to do today, and we're going to do my February wrap up and talk about the books I read in February. I think I read, wait, how many books did I read in February? Like 17? I'm not sure, but basically I won't be talking about any books for too long because I have written a full Goodreads review for every book I will be talking about in this video. So if you want to know more about my thoughts, you can check the review out on my Goodreads. So yeah, let's get started. My goal in February was to read mainly long books. I wanted to try and read every book over 400 pages because I read 35 books in January and I decided I needed to read less. So I just read longer books. So I didn't stick to it completely, but I did try to read the long books that I usually put off. But the first book I finished was Heidi by Joanna Spyri, and this is like a children's classic about a girl called Heidi who goes to live on the mountains with I don't know, like a great uncle or something. I have no idea about the relationship, and to be honest, this was gonna get 5 stars from me. It was just such an enjoyable classic, and it really was very soothing and comforting and just a really enjoyable read. But then at the end, I mean, this is kind of spoilers, but I feel like I should talk about it. One of the characters is ill and she's in a wheelchair and stuff, and then she just gets cured at the end for no reason. Very similar to The Secret Garden, how Colin could just walk the whole time and no one knew. Basically the same thing happened in this book. So I didn't actually end up rating it because I just didn't really feel comfortable with how it ended. I know it was written a while ago, but I'm just really fed up of every time someone's ill in an old book, they either die or just get magically cured, which is not how it generally works for people. So that just kind of ruined the experience for me. So it was going to be a 5-star, but then I just didn't end up rating it because I didn't really know how to. The next book I finished was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and this is a very long historical fiction book that I've been putting off for a while because it's so long, but I got the audiobook and I listened to it and I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's a World War II novel that follows 2 sisters. What are their names? Vianne and Isabel, I think. I should probably know that because Isabel's my name. Yeah, her name is Isabel. And we follow these 2 sisters. Isabel is younger and she decides that she wants to fight the Nazis because they are in occupied France. And so she starts off with this group who hand round propaganda and stuff, and then she makes a huge difference in the war by creating an escape route for grounded pilots. And then we also follow Vianne, who has a daughter and a husband who has gone off to war, and she is having to live with a Nazi in her home because it's occupied France. And so we follow these 2 sisters and kind of the different way the war affects them and the different ways they find to fight back. And it's completely different for both of them, but they still have their way of trying to make a difference and trying to make things better. And especially for Isabel, this is actually based on a real life story of a woman who did create an escape route out of France and saved a lot of grounded pilots and could have made a massive difference in the war. She saved hundreds of pilots. And yeah, it was just a really, really really interesting book. I do think there were some slower moments. This definitely could have been shorter because there was just a lot of like setup and then a lot of scenes of especially Vianne just like living her life. And I know it's interesting to see kind of how the war progressed and like what it was like for people who were living in it. I definitely feel like some of the scenes were kind of just repetitive and unnecessary, but overall it was a really impactful book. And like I said, I wrote a long review about it, so you can check it out on Goodreads. But I think it was a fantastic read, and definitely if you're into World War II books and kind of like feminism and especially the women's role in the war, then I would highly recommend it. So yeah, I ended up giving that 4 stars. I've definitely enjoyed it, and I did cry at the end. I was doing so well until like the last 10 pages, and then it really got me. The next book I read was Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. I gave this 5 stars. This is a mostly autobiographical book with magical realism elements in it, and it follows our main character, Echo Brown, and well, she's not a character, I mean, this is her life. And I listened to the audiobook, and Echo Brown read the book for the audiobook, and I would highly recommend listening to the audiobook because it was really amazing, because she's kind of, you know, telling the story of her own life, and it was really nice to hear how the words sounded from her mouth and her mind, and I think that was a really great way to listen to it. And this was just a really impactful story. It covers sexual assault, depression, racism, like misogyny within the Black community, and just all the awful things Echo had to go through growing up, and kind of how she survived and how she still was able to make a life for herself. And it was just so inspiring and beautiful, and I loved the use of magical realism. It was especially used to kind of give words for mental health, and it was just really interesting to see the use of magical realism to kind of explain the mental health aspect, and I thought it was brilliant. And yeah, it does have quite a few trigger warnings, so I definitely make sure you check the trigger warnings before you read it, but I would absolutely recommend it to everyone. I think it's an incredible book and everyone should read it. The next book I read was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, and this is the second book in the Skyward series, and I gave this book 4 stars. Skyward was my second favourite book of 2019, and I read 180 books, so that was pretty impressive, but I think that set my expectations a bit too high. So I really enjoyed Starsight, and if I hadn't have read Skyward, it probably would have been a 5-star, but because Skyward was just so amazing, it kind of was like, oh, it's just not quite as good. Basically, this follows our main character Spencer, and she lives on this planet of detritus where humans kind of landed and are being like held captive kind of by these aliens which keep attacking them, so they can't leave this planet. And she wants to become a pilot, but her father was branded a coward because he deserted the pilot army thing, and so she has to work 10 million times harder than everyone else just to get her foot in the door. And it's just such a fast-paced, like high action, incredible sci-fi book, and I loved it so much. And this book was more slow and more political, and I did really enjoy the end, but there were some points where it was kind of dragging, and I kind of wanted to kind of return to the style of the first book. But overall it was an enjoyable read. It just didn't quite live up to my expectations. I then read Cryswall by Nina Varela. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I absolutely loved it. This is like a sci-fi fantasy-ish world where there are autome, which are basically like perfect humans that the humans have made. They're not like robots because they're like, they have brains and like they can think and feel and that kind of stuff, but they are like made to be this like perfect specimen of humans, and they have taken over the world, and the humans are oppressed by the Autome, and it follows our two main characters, Cryer and Isla. Isla is a human and Cryer is an Autome who's like the son of the king or something, and basically they kind of come together and figure out that the world is not how they first thought it was, and they want to make a change. And this is a female romance as well, and it's just such a brilliant book. It's so interesting and it's so action packed, and I loved the characters, and yeah, it was just really really good book. And I believe this is just a duology, and I'm so excited for the second book because we really left on a cliffhanger, and I would highly recommend picking this up. It was so good, and not enough people have read it, so go and read it, please. I then read The Never Tilting World by Rin Chapeko. I gave this book 3 stars. I mean, it kind of says why I gave it 3 stars by the fact that I'm really going to struggle to summarise this book for you because it's just so complicated. It basically follows this world where the world was split in two at this like breaking ceremony, and so there's like a world that's never light and a world that's never dark, and there's twins in either world but they both think the other one is dead, and it was like their mum who like caused the breaking, and they kind of have to go on this trip to try and undo what happened, and it's very complicated, which is what my main problem was. And it was also told from 4 perspectives, which got very confusing very fast, especially because we kind of just had like one chapter for all 4 characters in the like just one after the other in the beginning, and I was just so lost. I did really love the character of Odessa. She kind of had a chronic illness, like a fantasy related chronic illness, but she still had kind of like the symptoms and the struggles of chronic illness. And there was also another character with like PTSD and trauma, and also a female relationship, so it had a really cool rep. And I believe everyone is like Asian. I think that's how Rin Chapeko casts everyone. I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that. I can't remember, but I don't think any of them are white. So yeah, it was really cool, but it was just too confusing and long-winded. So if it sounds intriguing, I wouldn't like dissuade you from picking it up, but if you don't like complicated fantasy worlds, then I would probably give this one a miss. I then read Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. This is the sequel to Anne of Green Gables, which I love very much. Also, I've been addicted to Anne with an E, the TV show on Netflix. If you like Anne of Green Gables, or even if you don't, you have to watch the TV show. It's the best thing to ever exist, and I'm so sad it got cancelled. And honestly, how dare they? I love it so much, go watch it. But I loved Anne of Avonlea. I didn't love it as much as the first one, just because I loved how young and free and spirited Anne is in the first book, and that's kind of missing a little bit in Anne of Avonlea. Not that she's like changed completely, but she's older and it's just a very different vibe. So I still enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars, but I just didn't love it as much as I loved Anne of Green Gables, but I think that's to be expected. I then read This Mortal Coil by Emily Suvada. I gave this book 3 stars. This is a sci-fi dystopian kind of world where basically everyone has like technology in them, like their whole world revolves around this tech that is inside of them, and a virus has like spread across everywhere, and people are either in hiding in like bunkers or like trying to survive in the world above. And we follow one of those characters whose name I can't remember. Oh, Katerina. And she finds out that her father is dead, and she is the only one that can like unlock this code and save the world basically. And this was fun. It was super high action, like there was so much action. It was really fast paced, and so that definitely kept me engaged, but it was very cliche and trope filled, and so it felt a little bit predictable because she just went for the predictable choice every time, and I wasn't really surprised. There were so many plot twists that it just got kind of ridiculous. It like was too many plot twists, if that can be a thing, because she just did it like every chapter, and it was like, it just felt unrealistic. So while it was fun and engaging, there was just a lot of things that kind of irritated me, which is why it got 3 stars. I then read Over the Top: A Raw Journey to Self-Love by Jonathan Van Ness. This is Jonathan Van Ness's autobiography. He's from Queer Eye, if you don't know, and I love Jonathan. He's my favourite Queer Eye member. I just love him so much. I think he's just one of the coolest and most inspirational people, and this was a very honest and raw book, and I thought it was brilliant. I don't rate autobiographies because I feel a bit weird like rating someone's life, but I probably would have given it like 4 or 5 stars if I was to rate it. And this has a lot of trigger warnings for like homophobia, addiction, drugs, alcohol, like all kinds of trigger warnings, so make sure you check them before you go into this book. But I just loved this autobiography. If you love Jonathan, then definitely read it, but even if you don't, I think it was a really interesting look into growing up as a queer person, especially kind of a more like open and flamboyant queer person, and also the struggles that LGBTQ plus people face with like homelessness and drugs and HIV, because Jonathan is HIV positive, and just it was just really interesting, and I think a very interesting look at the queer community that we don't get to see too often because it's kind of like taboo for people to talk about. And so I just really applaud Jonathan for his like honesty and for opening up with his story. I think it really makes a difference when everyone tells their story. I then read An Arc of the Midnight Lie by Marie Rutkowski. This is out now though, so you can buy it now. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is a fantasy world where they're kind of separated in class, very like there's a very structured class system, and we follow Nirim, who is like the lowest of the low, and she meets this traveller Sid, and Sid kind of offers her this opportunity to go and live with the High Kith, which are like the top like class, and see if they can find magic. And so they kind of set off on this adventure to try and find magic, and they find out some darker secrets along the way. And this is also a female romance, which is super cool. And overall, it's just a really engaging fantasy world, and I just really enjoyed the story. I was always interested. There wasn't really any point where I was bored. I do think the side characters were very lacking. It was mainly just like a 2-character story with like 1 side character. So that was what frustrated me the most, is just it didn't feel quite 3-dimensional. It felt like it needed a bit more depth. But apart from that, it was really good, and if you've been looking forward to this book, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It was really great. I then reread We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mahia because I got sent an arc of We Unleash the Merciless Storm, so I wanted to reread the first book in order to read the second and final book, and I loved it. This takes place in a Latinx-inspired dystopian world where women are trained to become primeras and segundas, which basically means like every man gets 2 wives, and they kind of have to like serve him in a sort of way. And we follow Carmen and Danny, who get put together in a house, and they kind of start off as enemies and then become friends and then lovers, and all the while having to deal with the misogyny and sexism that is running rampant in this world, and also think about joining an uprising to try and make a difference. And I really loved this when I first read it. I gave it 4 stars. I still really enjoyed it the second time, even knowing what was going to happen, and I'm glad I read it before the second book because there was quite a lot I forgot about it. I then read This Cruel Design by Emily Suvada. This is the second book in the Mortal Coil series. I gave this 2 stars, and to be honest, the only reason I didn't give it 1 star is because objectively it wasn't terrible, and I usually save my 1 stars for like terrible books, but this was just the same as the first book. It was just exactly the same. The plot was just identical. So I don't really have much to say about it except that the plot was just the same as the first one, and I was so bored because it just got so predictable. Even the kind of plot twists was so predictable because you just knew she was going to make a plot twist, that they didn't even become plot twists. They were just other stupid things that cropped up. So I was really frustrated with this book, and it was like pretty long, and it was not worth the time I spent reading it, but like I kind of wanted to know what happened, so I didn't want to like stop reading it. But yeah, it was highly disappointing. I then read Anne of the Island by Ellen Montgomery. This is the third book in the Anne of Green Gables series. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I definitely enjoyed it more than book 2. Book 2 just kind of slowed down and didn't have more of my favourite elements about Anne and her life in Avonlea, and this book just got a bit more charming again, and you know, we're just watching Anne mature, and it was just really nice. I really enjoyed it. I then DNF'd The Upside of Falling by Alex Light. I DNF'd this at 30%. I gave it 1 star because it was just awful. The premise of this is it's just a romance book, but it was supposed to be like a fake dating trope. And so, like, fake dating is usually quite unbelievable because it's like, who really fake dates? But I love fake dating. And one of my favourite books is To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which the first book is all about fake dating because Lara Jean is trying to save face in front of the boy she loves, who loves her sister, and Peter, who she fake dates with, is trying to make his ex-girlfriend jealous. So that's a good setup for fake dating. That makes sense. They've both got a motive, they both have a reason why that came about. Makes sense. This book, genuinely, this girl just says to this other girl who's making fun of her for never having a boyfriend, she's like, oh, I have a boyfriend. And then this boy just walks up behind her and is like, hey babe, and like pretends to be her boyfriend, even though he doesn't know that what she said isn't true, and also he doesn't really know her, and then they just like fall in love and fake date for no reason, and it was just the dumbest setup I've ever read. Don't bother with it. Just read To All the Boys I've Loved Before. I then read We Unleash the Merciless Storm by Taylor K. Mahia. I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic conclusion to the series, and I will read anything else Taylor K. Mahia writes. And I really liked that this book is told from the perspective of Carmen. The first book was told from the perspective of Danny, and Carmen was always kind of my favourite, and so I really enjoyed seeing from her point of view. The plot was great. I really loved the female solidarity and the female romance, and I just felt very empowered by this book. And you can read my whole long review that I wrote down below if you follow me on Goodreads, because I wrote quite a detailed review. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts, then you can check that out. But I won't talk about it too much here in case you haven't read the first book and don't want any spoilers. I then read A Heart in a Body in the World by Deb Coletti, and I also gave this book 5 stars. This book was just incredible. It will be on my favourite books of the year list, and it was just beautiful. It follows our main character Annabelle, who is suffering from PTSD, guilt, trauma, grief after an event that happened 9 months ago, and one day when she is just feeling like there's nowhere else to turn, she decides to run and not stop running, and so she runs across the country from Seattle to Washington DC, I believe. And this kind of follows her as she has to process her trauma and her grief and look at what happened, and kind of, you know, look at how you continue living when you are carrying all that weight with you. And it was just beautiful. It was so quietly profound and so beautiful in its like simplicity, and just it was just stunning. As someone who suffers with like depression, anxiety and trauma, I thought the writing was very authentic, and I really liked that it never felt exploitative or like it was used for shock value. I think it was handled with real care and consideration, and what happened to Annabelle and how she dealt with it, like I said, didn't feel exploitative and like it was playing up for the book. Like, it just felt very real and it was just beautiful, and I just implore everyone to read this book. Again, make sure you check the trigger warnings, but I cried so much. Like, I listened to the audiobook, and through the last like half an hour of the audiobook I was just sobbing. It just really, really spoke to me, and it was just stunning. I then reread Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery because I read 2 and 3 and then I was like, I should read number 1 again, because do I need an excuse to read Anne of Green Gables? No. Am I gonna do it? Absolutely. And yeah, Anne of Green Gables just follows this girl called Anne who is an orphan, and at age 11 comes to live with siblings Marilla and Matthew, and it kind of just chronicles her life fitting into this small town of Avonlea, and this is written in like at the early 1900s, so it's just very like quaint and charming and just a really, really lovely story. And no one gets magically cured, so that's great. And that is everything I finished in February. There were some great books, there were some not so great books, but overall I'm pleased with my reading month. I'm pleased that I got through some quite chunky books because that was my goal, and I did quite well. Kind of more towards the end of the month I kind of gave up on that and just read what I wanted to read. But yeah, overall it was a pretty successful reading month. I'm hoping to get this video out as soon as I can, but it will take me a while to edit because I can't really use my hands properly. And yeah, I hope you don't mind this position. I mean, you can still see my face and I can still put the books up, so I mean, you know, it's kind of just like when people vlog from their beds, except I just can't get out of my bed, so here we are. But I hope this is alright. I really missed making videos, so I just kind of wanted to find a way to still be able to do that. I have a hospital bed, so like it moves and stuff, so it works okay. I think this is okay for now until I can get back to my usual filming setup. But yeah, I just really missed everyone and I just wanted to make more content, so here we are. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to everyone who has sent me lovely messages on Twitter, and all the lovely book friends I've made who are so supportive, and just, yeah, everyone's just very patient and very nice, and I'm really grateful to everyone for sticking around because I really, really love making videos. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you in my next video, which hopefully won't be too far away. So yeah, bye.